The Iron Warriors are one of the 9 traitor legions of Chaos Space Marines, and they stand as a formidable testament to the treachery that marred the Horus Heresy. Originally known as the 4th Legion, their expertise lay in the art of siege warfare and the assault of static fortifications, skills that positioned them in fierce opposition and contrast to the Imperial Fist's Legion, who were renowned for their impenetrable defensive constructs. This rivalry, fueled by their contrasting doctrines and the near mirror opposites that were their primarchs, Perturabo and Rogel Dorn, played a significant role in the Iron Warriors' eventual defection to Chaos. Perturabo, the primarch of the Iron Warriors, wasn't equal to Dorn in the realms of fortification and military strategy. However, his sense of betrayal and marginalization by his brother Primarch only deepened as the Horus Heresy unfolded. Dorn's proud assertions and victories were perceived by Perturabo as personal affronts even before the heresy, which inevitably drove a massive wedge between them and set the stage for their opposing stances during the Galactic Civil War. The Iron Warriors' obsession with cybernetic augmentation also reflected their grim dedication and obsession with warfare. Much like their counterparts in the Adeptus Mechanicus and even the loyalist Iron Hands, they were and still are notorious for their use of cybernetic enhancements. Something that does set them apart from almost all throughout the galaxy is that when they are afflicted by the mutagenic gifts of the ruinous powers, the Iron Warriors will often amputate the affected limb or body part and replace it with a mechanical prosthetic, a practice that underscores their commitment to functionality over aesthetics and control over raw, undiluted power. Perturabo's early life on the planet known as Olympia would be marked by relentless warfare between city-states, which would profoundly shape his approach to siege warfare. Discovered as an infant by the agents of Damikos, the so-called Tyrant of Lokos, Perturabo would be raised in an environment which bred coldness and mistrust. Despite his detached demeanor, he had mastered the art of siegecraft through his relentless exposure to Olympia's brutal and unending conflicts. These formative experiences equipped him with a deep understanding of both the theoretical and the practical aspects of siege warfare, thereby cementing his reputation as a master strategist and setting the stage for his eventual rise and fall in the annals of galactic history, along with his legion's own fall. When the Great Crusade reached Olympia in 849 M30 and Perturabo himself had the revelation of his cosmic destiny, a pivotal moment would occur. With the Emperor's acknowledging of Perturabo's prowess, he designated him as a Primarch of the Iron Warriors Legion, a declaration that led to the displacement of Perturabo's adopted father, Dakamos, and the integration of Olympia's most capable individuals into the 4th Legion. Under Perturabo's command, the Iron Warriors emerged as the preeminent siege specialists within the Emperor's forces. Perturabo's intellect was characterized by a cold and calculating demeanor, which was ideally suited for the intricacies of siege warfare. His proficiency extended not only to siege warfare, but to the knowledge of advanced technology, allowing him to engage in intricate discourse with the highest echelons of the ancient Mechanicum. Later, training on Mars would further hone the Iron Warriors' expertise, elevating them to the level of proficiency matched only by the Imperial Fists of Rogel Dorn. The Iron Warriors' methodical approach to warfare would prove to be devastatingly effective. Worlds that had previously resisted the Emperor's vision would succumb to their relentless siege tactics, which were employed expertly by Perturabo's Legion. The strategic mastery of siege warfare, which they exemplified, ensured the submission of numerous worlds to Imperial compliance, sparing them from the ravages of prolonged warfare in fruitless conflicts. Despite these advancements, Perturabo's sense of dissatisfaction and resentment grew greater and greater still. In an apparent bid to outshine Rogel Dorn and his other brother Primarchs, he would undertake increasingly demanding missions. These endeavors, while showcasing the Legion's formidable capabilities, exacted a harsh toll on the Iron Warriors. The relentless application of force, though efficient, eroded the resilience of even these transhuman warriors, marking a somber chapter in Perturabo's legion. The Iron Warriors' preparations for warfare were often marked and easily identified by their rigorous discipline and their affinity for sustained violence. This relentless drive led them to prefer facing defiant foes over surrendering enemies, seeking to unleash their built-up aggression through the complete subjugation of their enemies. Their preference for confronting defiant defenders became emblematic of their siege warfare approach, as they reveled in a troubling aspect which exemplified and was a cornerstone of their battle ethos. Compounding their unrest, the Iron Warriors were increasingly assigned as garrison forces, small contingents tasked with the protection of worlds that they had painstakingly brought into imperial compliance. This role, which was often rejected by other primarchs for its demoralizing impact on their Astartes, would be reluctantly accepted by Perturabo. However, his dissatisfaction with the role would only deepen pre-existing grudges, fueling the ever-growing sense of grievances. Ironically, it was because he had been so cocksure in taking so many of the more difficult missions that he was assigned these more difficult missions, which caused both an emotional and a psychological turmoil within Perturabo. As the Horus Heresy loomed, Perturabo's frustrations had reached a boiling point, his mounting bitterness exacerbated by what some speculate were the manipulations of the War Master. It is suggested that Horus, not the Emperor, orchestrated the events and the deployments in order to rile up Perturabo's frustrations further. The situation reached a tragic climax when the death of Damikos, Perturabo's adopted father, triggered a rebellion on Olympia. Perturabo's response was one of unrestrained fury. Upon returning to his homeworld, he would extract a brutal retribution, resulting in the slaughter of countless innocents and the incineration of entire cities. The scale of his vengeance left Perturabo in a perpetual state of profound despair, struggling to grapple with the enormity of his actions. Before he could address the devastation that he had wrought, Perturabo was summoned to confront rebel forces following the War Master's virus bombing on Isfahan III. The Iron Warriors were commanded to enforce justice, a directive that marked their definitive turn to the cause of the traitors. The precise machinations by which Horus manipulated the Lord of Iron remained somewhat obscured by the sands of time, but the outcome was clear. The Iron Warriors were now irrevocably aligned with a traitorous cause. With their participation in the drop site massacre on Isfahan V, their fates were sealed. Once liberated from the constraints that had previously restrained him, Perturabo unleashed his destructive tendencies with a vengeance, laying waste to world after world in the service of the War Master. Under his command, the Iron Warriors carved out an empire of iron around Olympia and its neighboring star systems, while a fraction of the 4th Legion applied their formidable skills to the siege of Terra. This epic confrontation allowed Perturabo's Gene-Sons to measure their prowess against those of Rogel Dorn. The outcome of the clash between the Iron Warriors and Dorn's masterfully designed defenses remains shrouded in hearsay, as the War Master's death precluded the final resolution that the Iron Warriors sought. The Iron Warriors who had participated in the Siege of Terra subsequently would retreat into the Eye of Terror with the other traitors. Simultaneously, those who had established their dominion around Olympia braced for the inevitable counteroffensive by the Loyalist legions, in an event that became known as the Great Scouring. In a dramatic twist characteristic of this era filled with grim tidings, the Imperial Fists, amongst others, undertook a siege of the Iron Warriors' holdings. After a decades-long campaign marked by relentless conflict, the traitors' forces were finally ousted from their domain, but not before the Iron Warriors detonated their nucleonic stockpiles, reducing Olympia to a wasteland of ruin and taking many loyalists out with it. One of Perturabo's most notorious campaigns, which is said to have earned him the dark favor of Apotheosis as a demon primarch, occurred on Sebastus IV. Here, Perturabo orchestrated the construction of the Eternal Fortress, a formidable bastion encircled by an elaborate network of trenches, redoubts, minefields, razor wire. These defenses were completely unlike traditional fortifications, which were normally designed to protect, were actually purpose-made to exact as large a toll from the assaulting forces as humanly possible, while providing the minimal amount of protection necessary for the defending forces. Ergo, the Eternal Fortress was conceived solely as a challenge to ensnare Rogol Dorn, and this iron cage was meticulously crafted to defy Dorn's vaunted skills and ensnare him in a trap which there was no escape from. Despite the entries of his brother, the Imperial Regent, Rabuk Guilliman, Rogol Dorn fell victim to Perturabo's challenge, who boasted that no one could breach his fortress. Dorn led the entirety of the Imperial Fist's legion into what would infamously become known as the Iron Cage. What ensued was a cataclysm of death and destruction of nearly unparalleled scale. The Imperial Fists, renowned for their resilience, faced losses so staggering that they rivaled those experienced during the height of the Horus Heresy. Trapped in meticulously orchestrated ambushes, they were subjected to the full measure of the Iron Warrior's strategic prowess. As the casualties mounted and the Imperial Fists struggled against the Iron Warrior's elaborate stratagems, Dorn's captains urged for a strategic retreat as they recognized the grim reality. The Imperial Fists had been outmaneuvered in a siege, which was an unprecedented blow, not just to their legacy, but to the Legion's morale. Dorn's resolve, however, remained unyielding. He could not bring himself to order a withdrawal, despite the clear and present need for one. In a dramatic turn, Rabuk Guilliman intervened. Unable to stand idly by while his brother faced complete annihilation, he dispatched the Ultramarines to relieve the beleaguered Imperial Fists. Confronted with a combined might of two legions, Perturabo chose to withdraw, having achieved his strategic objective and forever thumbed his nose at the Imperial Fists, who were left devastated. 400 battle brothers lost, with many more wounded and or permanently crippled. In a grim exchange, Perturabo offered the untainted gene seed harvested from the Imperial Fists to the Chaos Gods, which led to him receiving Apotheosis as his dark reward, turning him into the ultimate weapon he sought to be at the end of the Heresy, when he had finally chosen to once more become a turncoat, intending to attack Horus Lupercal after his confrontation with the Emperor. In the 41st millennium, the Iron Warriors continue to plague the Imperium from their demon world of Medrengard. Located within the Eye of Terror and commanded by various warsmiths, the Iron Warriors' warbands persistently seek new spoils and technological advancements, which has gained them a close alliance with the heretics of the Dark Mechanicum, along with the boons that would come from the aspirant god, Vashtor the Arcaphane, which has enabled them to deploy some of the most formidable and numerous armies of demon engines against the forces of the Imperium, perpetuating their legacy of relentless warfare and disruption. To be truly understood, the Iron Warriors' descent into chaos must be viewed from a more narrowed scope, going all the way back to the Solar Decades, where the Legion was used as a relentless battering ram during the Great Crusade. They were, in essence, a relentless force designed to breach every impenetrable fortress and dismantle any citadel that stood against the Emperor's will. And this fearsome reputation would be boosted by their merciless warfare and their unparalleled expertise in siegecraft, both defensive and offensive. Their primarch Perturabo would amplify these tendencies greater still, as he was renowned to be both a ruthless and effective warlord, as his strategic genius was marked by a razor-sharp intellect that could discern the hidden vulnerabilities of any adversary and exploit them with brutal efficiency. As it seemed to Perturabo, defeat was an anathema, and he was willing to pay any price in blood to secure victory. Yet beneath this illustrious facade, there was a deep-seated discord and despondence within the 4th Legion itself. This internal strife was often fueled by any and all perceived slights, be they true or just illusions. It became increasingly apparent throughout the Great Crusade that there was a growing distance and mistrust between the Iron Warriors and all those other participants of the Great Crusade they once had championed. Perturabo's own bitterness and constant paranoia festered, which eroded the cohesion of his very legion, and when Horus's treachery was exposed on Isstvan III, the Iron Warriors' legion was already in crisis, as they had been scattered across the galaxy jealousy and were still reeling from a brutal suppression of their own homeworld of Olympia. They were nonetheless quick to answer the call to confront the traitors, many of the legionaries believing that this would truly prove to the emperor who they were. However, when Perturabo led the bulk of his legion to Isfahan V, their wrath was not directed at the traitors, but rather at those who remained loyal to the emperor. The festering discontent within the legion would finally be reached, as the Iron Warriors' betrayal marked the culmination of their internal decay, and in the years that followed, billions would suffer for their dark turn. The 4th Legion, known as the Iron Warriors, had historically remained steadfast in adherence to their organizational structures, combat methods, and the equipment established for the Legions Astartes, all the way back to the dawn of the Great Crusade. Remarkably, for many Terran years, the Legion did not incorporate any new cultural influences from their interactions with a primarch. As a consequence, the Legion's approach to warfare remained largely static, as the Iron Warriors relied on their tried and true methods of relentless and meticulous applied force, overcoming obstacles with sheer brute strength rather than any innovative stratagems or dramatic heroics. This unwavering adherence to their original combat doctrine increasingly set them apart from their brother legions. By this stage of the Great Crusade, most other Space Marine legions had diverged significantly from their foundational Terran template, often displaying distinct and sometimes extreme traits in both character and warfare, whether or not they had been united with their primarch. Two great examples of this would be the Revenant Legion, eventually to become known as the Blood Angels, and the Dusk Raiders, eventually to be known as the Death Guard. In stark contrast, the 4th Legion's consistency and pragmatism were seen by some as markers of their unimaginative and mechanistic nature. This perception of the Iron Warriors as being honorless and rigid was particularly evident in the eyes of their peers, including Horus himself, who nonetheless saw them within the higher echelons of the Great Crusade's own command structure, where these very traits were regarded as assets. The 4th Legion's reliability and willingness to adhere to the commands from outside of their own ranks made them a rather dependable force, especially when compared to the more esoteric and unpredictable legions, such as the White Scars, the Thousand Sons, and the Night Lords. The 4th Legion, the Iron Warriors, would become the cornerstone of the Great Crusade's relentless military campaigns, all the while enduring grueling and often thankless tasks of attrition warfare. Their reputation was that of the Workhorse Legion, which was cemented through their consistent application of martial prowess and their undoubtable reliability in executing orders to the letter, almost to their own detriment. Unlike their contemporaries, such as Leman Russ of the Space Wolves and Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, or even Horus Lupical and his Luna Wolves, who resisted dividing their forces for the orders of lesser human commanders, the Iron Warriors showed no hesitation in accepting any lawful duty assigned to them. If they had been commanded to follow the orders of a mere mortal, the legionaries would, just the same as if they were commanded to follow the orders of a primarch. They were frequently deployed in protracted sieges and campaigns that, while crucial for securing victory, yielded very little in the terms of glory and adoration. In addition, these laborious campaigns that the Iron Warriors undertook were the rather formidable tasks of garrisoning worlds deemed far too perilous for conventional forces, which demonstrated their role as both the vanguard and the shield of the Imperium. Their path was charted by the strategic imperatives placed upon them during the Great Crusade, as they advanced from one war zone to the next without any fanfare, drawing but the barest grim satisfaction from their essential but unheralded service. Over time, the Iron Warriors began to experience a subtle yet significant shift. Their formerly formidable numbers dwindled due to attrition, and their brother legions surpassed them in accolades and renown, as a gradual erosion in their standing was perhaps a precursor to the deeper rifts within the legions Astartes. Their reunification with their primarch further exacerbated the growing estrangement from their fellow legionaries, a fracture that would continue to deepen over time. From its inception, the Iron Warriors operated as a disciplined and relentless force, embodying steadfast resilience enlightened, as their name would later symbolize. Renowned for their technological aptitude, they were amongst the most proficient of legions in integrating the technology and weapons provided to them by the Imperium. Although the 10th, the Iron Hands, often overshadowed them in the early years of the Great Crusade, the Iron Warriors' tactical preference was to strike from a position of overwhelming superiority and applying the maximum force directly against their enemies, which set them greatly apart from other similar legions. As the 4th Legion solidified its role as a primary fighting force, their methods would evolve to emphasize detailed pre-battle planning and the use of massive, sustained bombardments to soften up enemy positions before an assault. The Iron Warriors excelled in calculating continuous fields of fire, employing high-intensity shelling, along with deploying heavy armor and mechanized units to spearhead their attacks. This led to the development of one of their most formidable weapons, the artillery trains, which have lost use since the Great Crusade. Despite their cerebral and pragmatic approach to warfare, the Iron Warriors' stubbornness was equally pronounced. Once engaged, they would not relent unless commanded directly to withdraw by the highest authority, even in the face of severe setbacks or staggering casualties. This unwavering resolve would become a point of pride within the Legion, driving them to achieve victory through sheer discipline and firepower, regardless of the human cost. The Legion's most glaring demonstration of this paradox was the protracted and grueling campaign to liberate the Forge world of Encaldalon between 842 and 843 M30. Despite their victory, the campaign resulted in a near annihilation of the 8th Expeditionary Fleet's frontline forces, raising concerns amongst the imperial court and primarchs. Critics would speculate that the Iron Warriors had deliberately courted defeat to showcase their determination and ability to complete their mission no matter what the odds. In part, this was because during this campaign, the Iron Warriors refused to withdraw, despite their initial assault unraveling due to an unprecedented enemy counterattack. They would, despite this, continue to adhere to their flawed and already failed battle plan, resulting in nearly 29,000 of their numbers falling in a single engagement. This battle proved to be one of the cruelest and most costly of the Imperium yet, with significant losses amongst the Legion's veteran units and the slaughter of over 2 million Imperial Army soldiers under their command. By the end of the decade, the 4th Legion had fallen from favor. Their star dimmed as other legions rose to prominence. The successful yet costly campaign had marred their early successes, leading to the death of many of the senior command staff and commanders, and the decimation of their ranks overall. Although their gene seed continued to prove highly adaptable, being one of the most useful in turning those who were barely considered human into legionaries, which allowed for effective implantation and a quick regrowth in numbers, the Legion's numbers had diminished in comparison to their contemporaries. As the Luna Wolves and the Dark Angels outshone them in both glory and conquest, the 4th Legion awaited the arrival of their Primarch, now a diminished force, in search of new purpose. Now, to understand how the Legion interacted with the Primarch, it is important to go back and have a brief overview of the Primarch himself prior to his integration with the Legion. And it all started when the Chaos Gods had scattered the 20 infant Primarchs across the galaxy from Terra. Within each of the gestation pods was a child. Within one of them was Perturabo, who would land on Olympia, a rugged planet characterized by the incessant conflict between multiple human states. The infant was eventually discovered by the forces of Damikos, the formidable tyrant of Lokos, while clinging to sheer cliffs beneath the city-state of Lokos. Intrigued by the child's apparent resilience and inherent skills, Damikos had the child brought before him. Eventually, in what mirrors the Greek and Roman tradition, the tyrant adopted the boy as his own, as he sought to nurture and educate Perturabo. Despite this, the child remained distant and unresponsive. Regardless of Damikos' efforts, Perturabo's interactions were marked by an unmistakable aloofness, reflecting the cold and meticulous, melancholic demeanor of the primarch. However, his sharp intellect and formidable mind did not go unnoticed, as Perturabo quickly mastered every art, including the art of siege warfare, which was a discipline crucial to Olympia's warring states, which would provide ample opportunities for both practical and theoretical learning. Perturabo eventually would become close to his sister, the only one who he truly felt a kinship to. However, his brother was another story. His adopted brother was an artist in and of himself, filled with incredible talent for a mortal. But in comparison to Perturabo, he would often and almost exclusively fall short, much to the primarch's glee. However, in one instance, said brother was challenged by Perturabo himself to create a great statue. And while Perturabo's statue itself was of unparalleled mechanical perfection, even Perturabo had to admit that his brother had outdone him, since his creation had a spark to it. This would enrage Perturabo, leading to a distancing from his family. However, his sister would continue to be a crucial part of his life. This would lead to her being the only one to be able to refer to him by a nickname, and eventually it would be the same sister who would join in on the rebellion on the planet. Eventually, Perturabo would take part in the Great Crusade. The transition was notably swift and rather seamless, in stark contrast to the often protracted assimilations of other primarchs. It is probable that Damocos was rather keen to align Olympia with the emergent imperium, saw the release of Perturabo as a minor but beneficial concession. Perturabo, for his part, had already contemplated his own nature as an artificially created being, and awaited the eventual revelation of his creation, and to witness his creator. His understanding, though abstract, was confirmed when the emperor arrived in 849 M30 to reclaim his lost son and integrate him into the imperium. Upon his initial integration, Perturabo had in essence decimated his own legion. But despite this, his intellectual prowess would be immediately recognized upon any of his remarks. While each of the emperor's primarchs exhibited an extraordinary capacity for learning and adaptation beyond that of any unmodified human, Perturabo's abilities were particularly notable even amongst his brothers, as he was quickly acknowledged as the most scientifically and technologically gifted of the emperor's sons, with a ravenous intellect that set him apart from all others. However, Perturabo's brilliance was often turned inwards. From the outset, he was perceived as a rather detached and calculating figure, showing little interest in social interactions or in elucidating his actions and intentions. This guarded demeanor extended to even his own fellow primarchs, his brothers, with whom he interacted with a particular and notable coldness and indifference. Despite these personality quirks, the emperor saw in Perturabo a valuable asset, a formidable strategist, and a general whose relentless efficiency was matched only by his intellectual acumen. For Perturabo, warfare was a complex problem to dissect and solve, and it was not long before his formidable mind would unleash its full potential upon the enemies of mankind, demonstrating the fearsome power of his strategic genius. Following a period of intense collaboration with the emperor, he absorbed the intricacies of the Great Crusade, which would lead to Perturabo assuming command of the 4th Legion, his own gene seed having been firmly implanted within the ranks. This transition of authority was executed with remarkable speed. At the time, approximately 35,000 Astartes of the 4th Legion had been mustered to form his independent command, with an additional contingent stationed across the Imperium in similar garrisons and detachments. Upon reviewing his legion's war record and doctrines, along with their practices and combat tactics, Perturabo found them lacking compared to their peers. His response was a brutal and unyielding edict of decimation. As stipulated, war is unequivocal, uncaring, and unforgiving. And it is also blind. Blind also will be the selection of those who pay the blood price for the great failure of your record. Under this decree, 1 in 10 legionaries was chosen by lottery to be executed by their comrades, a grim testament to Perturabo's utterly uncompromising approach. This drastic measure drew considerable criticism from the imperial court and his fellow primarchs. Some feared the emperor had entrusted a Space Marine legion to a madman, while others, more restrained, suggested that Perturabo's command had come too soon, given his inexperience with the Imperium's ways. Rabut Guillemin, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, was amongst the most vocal of detractors. He condemned the execution of valiant Astartes who had fought alongside his own legion, and this clash of opinions created a lasting rift between the two Primarchs, one that would simmer beneath the surface for decades later. Despite these objections, the Emperor's decision stood. The survivors of Perturabo's ruthless purge were left with a stark lesson. Under his rule, failure was met with death, and war was viewed as a binary equation. Perturabo's intolerance for mediocrity meant that simply being superior was inefficient. The Legion was expected to be unparalleled, perfect even. The irony of this would not be lost on those who would later view the kinship between the 4th and the 3rd. His goal was to transform the 4th Legion into an unrivaled instrument of war, and he would set about this task with a relentless determination that had characterized him so. His first test of this newly forged weapon would be against the forces of the Morita cluster, where the Olympia Majoris star system was situated on the periphery. The 4th Legion's first significant trial under Perturabo's command came with a confrontation that would test their resolve like no other. Their campaign to integrate the Morita cluster into imperial compliance. As he was now leading this newly assembled expeditionary fleet, Perturabo charted a course directly into the heart of this cluster, targeting the formidable adversary he had long anticipated and waited for. On Olympia, tales of this enemy were shrouded in legend. Their perceived appearances on the planet every so often brought a horrific bloodbath and widespread enslavement of segments of the populace, leaving the populace scared and subjugated until their demands were met. These antagonists were known as the Black Judges, self-proclaimed arbiters of humanity's purity, who had extended their existence through ancient and malevolent technology. Once human, they had metamorphosed into decrepit entities, their frail bodies encased in mechanized warsuits, controlled by advanced cybernetic systems. The Black Judges' survival hinged on regular infusions of fresh human genetic material and viscera, extracted through a gruesome process that left their victims dead, essentially harvesting humans to prolong their own unnatural existence. From their fortress on a barren, raven-strewn moon known as the Rock of Judgment, they extracted control over a dozen human-inhabited worlds through fear, offering a malevolent form of protection from Xenos threats in exchange for constant tributes of young and healthy humans. Functionally, they were little better than the Drukhari. The 4th Legion, still reeling from Perturabo's punitive decimation, was driven by a desperate need to prove their worth to their father. Their rage and frustration was now directed squarely at the Black Judges, who became the focus of their unending retribution. The assault on the Rock of Judgment was a direct and ferocious engagement. The moon had been heavily fortified, with defense laser batteries and swarms of fighter drones, which were akin to the technology used in the Dark Age of technology. That, along with the Black Judges' own warp-capable battleships, rendered this fortress a formidable bastion which had withstood countless assaults over the millennia. Yet, the unrelenting fury of the entirety of the 4th Legion proved overwhelming, and despite the Rock's staunch defenses, it fell before the relentless assault of the Iron Warriors, marking a decisive victory and creating the first in the brutal testaments to the Legion's wrath and determination. The Black Judges had been beings sustained by arcane and malevolent technologies, and they were truly formidable warriors. Each one had been encased in armor that was a form of life support, which were virtually impervious to bolter fire, and armed with razor scourges and ray cannons, akin to that of dreadnoughts, which allowed them to match firepower with the Astartes' most devastating tools, the dreadnoughts, and there were hundreds of them. Despite the overwhelming odds, the 4th Legion would hold their ground in each point of their assault. Even as they fell in droves, their bodies torn apart within their power armor, the Iron Warriors would continue resolute, unbreaking, and unyielding, as the darkness of the battlefield would only be intermittently illuminated by the muzzle flashes and the thunderous roars of an unending stream of weapon fire, mingled with the screams of the dying and the unearthly screeching of minds twisted by centuries of life beyond human sanity. The legionaries would have gone so far as to use the corpses of their own fallen comrades as cover from the relentless energy rays of technology far too advanced to deal with conventionally, as they repeatedly rallied to charge the Black Judges, enduring the deadly onslaught in order to plant crack grenades and discharge meltablasts at point-blank range. For a time, the battle teetered on the knife's edge. In the confined vaults and corridors of their defensive strongholds, the Black Judges obviously had an upper hand. For every one that fell, a dozen Astartes would pay the price. It was in this dire moment that Perturabo made a decisive move. Observing the battle with superhuman intellect, Perturabo discerned the patterns and vulnerabilities within the chaos. He calculated the precise moment and location to strike for maximum efficiency. When he did, it was like a thunderbolt crashing into the ranks of the Black Judges, throwing them into disarray, as Perturabo, like a vengeful deity, tore through their lines. The power of the primarch blasting and burning, ripping apart their machine frames as if they were mere toys, and tearing the withered bodies within these mighty machines from within his gauntleted hands. As the Black Judges struggled to regain and realign their defenses against the unexpected and devastating threat, Perturabo's further plans would unfold. The elite heavy weapon support units of the 4th, informally known as Havocs, advanced in precisely coordinated attack patterns. These patterns perfectly anticipated the Black Judges' responses with uncanny accuracy, almost as if Perturabo had been planning both sides of the war himself. The Havocs isolated and blindsided their foes, delivering a relentless crossfire of autocannon shells and plasma bolts, ending the Black Judges' tyrannical rule with merciless efficiency. By Perturabo's design, the enemy was annihilated without mercy, as the dominions of the Black Judges were stripped of every valuable resource and technology. Spoils of war, including wreckage and weapons, would be transported to Olympia. The secrets long guarded by the Black Judges would be shared with the Mechanicum in exchange for their technical and mechanical support. Within the Rock of Judgment, stripped of its resources, was an ancient orbital shipyard, which would be repurposed. These relics of humanity's long-lost interstellar conquest would be set in orbit around Olympia. Under Perturabo's direction, they would begin to construct a new and much more powerful generation of warships, combining the technology of old with the modern under the direction of the Iron Warriors. Following Perturabo's decisive overthrow of the vaunted Black Judges and the subsequent claim of their domain for the Imperium, he turned his focus to further conquests as he purged the Xenos ectosquirds of Varankia and subjugated the renegade knight fiefdom of Lixos, thereby completing his quest of the cluster in short order. In the final conflict, Perturabo's legion forcibly ended a millennia-long schism dating back to the Age of Strife between the fragmented empire and its former masters in the Mechanicum, thereby earning considerable favor with the Lords of Mars. This period marked a crucible of transition for the 4th Legion, a time of trials and rigorous testing under their Primarch's command. With calculated precision and savage experimentation, Perturabo reshaped his legion to mirror his own bleak and unflinching, ruthless psyche. By the end of the Morita cluster campaign, the old 4th Legion was no more, as it had been reborn as the Iron Warriors, who were forged in blood and fire. In essence, they would be iron within and iron without. Upon returning to Olympia with his newly renamed force, the Iron Warriors, Perturabo's machinations were well underway. In alliance with the Mechanicum, the newly placed orbital shipyards and foundries blazed with frenetic activity. Some of these had been repurposed from the dead orbits around conquered stars, and they had been completely and utterly dragged and refitted, along with being repurposed to serve the Legion's needs, making them significantly more self-sufficient than many other legions. The worlds of the Morita cluster now would pay a tribute in flesh and blood to the Lord of Iron, rather than to the Black Judges. However, this would be preferable, even by the standards of the Imperium, since there was a chance of the survival of the tribute, which would feed his legion's insatiable demand for fresh warriors, weapons, and munitions. Everything orchestrated by Perturabo's meticulous designs seemed to go off swimmingly until outside parties would interfere, as the Iron Warriors had been reshaped in the crucible of war, amplifying the traits already present within the 4th Legion, rather than altering them beyond recognition like the Revenant Legion had been. The traits that were seen as beneficial were amplified by Perturabo to further align with his own. Where once the Legion had been ruthless in its willingness to accept losses in victory, it was now driven to a point where such considerations were deemed irrelevant. War had become a precise equation, one the Iron Warriors were supremely equipped to solve. They had evolved into an unyielding engine of destruction, capable of sweeping worlds clean and devouring entire armies. At the head of the newly constituted 125th Expeditionary Fleet, Perturabo would command a force that quickly became known as the battering ram of the Great Crusade. As they fought alongside their fellow legions, in turn they earned an unmatched reputation for their brutal efficiency, a mastery of armored warfare, and their perilous artillery skills. It was said that no fortress built by human or Xenos could withstand the Iron Warriors' relentless assaults. No stronghold they could not storm, no army they could not drown in a torrent of shot and shell. As time passed, a wedge would be driven between the Iron Warriors and other Space Marine legions, which only would deepen, fostering resentment, pride, and paranoia within the 4th Legion, much like that of their own primarch. Through his grim methods and savage example, Perturabo had instilled in his warriors a reflection of his own darkened soul. His suspicions and malevolent distrust, along with the callous indifference for life, grew alongside their ruthless determination, cold intellect, and the strength he sought to unlock within them. Given the 4th Legion's preference for open battle, its frequent deployment in siege assaults, what were renowned to be some of the most dangerous and unpredictable form of warfare the Imperium had often had to face, and its willingness to accept attrition as a price for victory from their primarch to every last legionary, it is perhaps unsurprising that the Iron Warriors are estimated by many sources to have suffered the highest overall casualties of any legion during the Great Crusade. Yet it is a testament to the legion and the cold, cruel genius of their master, Perturabo, that such losses were routinely absorbed without any significant long-term depreciation of their strategic fighting power. It seems that high casualties rarely resulted in any form of defeat for the 4th. Despite their genetically enhanced resilience to mental trauma and psycho-indoctrination, the continuous exposure to loss and destruction wrought a slow and bitter corruption of the Legion's psyche. Perturabo and his Iron Warriors sought no friends or allies amongst those who served with them, save perhaps for the Mechanicum agents who aided them in their quest for ever more powerful and effective means of waging war. In their fellow legions, they saw weakness bred by self-deceit, a lack of discipline, false mysticism, and vanity. They perceived all this as personal insults and slights towards them, both real and imagined. Even the many factions of the Mechanicum who marveled at Perturabo's technological intellect did not fully trust him or his legion, as the Iron Warriors' dangerous self-sufficiency and adeptness, coupled with their ignorance of the omniscience doctrines, only fueled their distrust. This was to the point that Perturabo brazenly insulted a Mechanicum's tech priest's beliefs and questions about his adherence and his knowledge of the omniscience, directly calling their faith into question. To the forces of the Exterminatus Imperialis, the host of the Imperial Army and its auxiliaries, the Iron Warriors' reputation was dark indeed. More than any other legion, the Iron Warriors were seen as willing to use the lives of mere humans and the auxiliaries as a strategic resource, expending them as cannon fodder to deplete the enemy's firepower. They would send sacrificial waves by the thousands to draw out their foes from their defensive positions and to gauge the enemy's strength by observing how quickly they would annihilate these forces. The repeated instances of this only served to further taint the Iron Warriors with their hated epithet of the corpse grinders amongst the common soldiers of the Great Crusade. Open mutinies were predictably and constantly suppressed through slaughter would continuously grow more increasingly frequent in war zones where the auxilia was under the command of the Iron Warriors. To mitigate this corrosive effect on morale, Warmaster Horus issued a standing order to ensure that the bulk of such troops assigned to the Iron Warriors were indentured criminals or enslaved non-compliants. By the last solar decades of the Great Crusade, rivalries and simmering disdain characterized the Iron Warriors' relationships with other legions. Notably, the apathy between the Iron Warriors and the Raven Guards, sparked by frictions during the Iskander War and an increasingly bitter rivalry with the Imperial Fists, underscored these tensions. Even when fighting successfully alongside other legions, such as the critical war against Mashhog, the Iron Warriors' contributions were often met with indifference or guarded disdain. Despite Overdog Mashhog, vast orbital fortifications repelling the repeated attacks from the Space Wolves and the White Scars, Perturabo's plan succeeded in breaking the line, allowing the orcs to be slaughtered. Yet the contemporary chronicles of his brother's legions, Perturabo is recorded as merely another nameless comrade in arms. This growing schism, perhaps more apparent in hindsight, was further exacerbated by the Warmaster's Machiavellian machinations, as he would often both goad Perturabo by reassigning him to different deployments on the Great Crusade by essentially making them seem like issuances and directives, along with disposition orders from Terra, in essence bleeding the Iron Warriors and scattering its strength across a myriad of splinter and expeditionary fleets, thankless sieges, and garrison positionings in the more dangerous and isolated corners of the Imperium. All the while, the Warmaster would massage Perturabo's ego while talking him down to the other eventual traitors. Meanwhile, Perturabo's own 125th Expeditionary Fleet faced deadly foe after deadly foe, neither asking nor receiving reinforcement or additional resources, save for those it could generate and or acquire itself. Bitter but steadfast, Perturabo complied, demonstrating the iron will that was both within and without his legion. In retrospect, such events only served to foment and amplify the resentment and discord within the 4th Legion, further alienating it from the Imperium it served. This growing divide began to drain its warriors as they faced some of the worst horrors in the Great Crusade. Indeed, it is plausible that this was Horus's planning all along, wearing down Perturabo and essentially guaranteeing that one of his brothers would be an outcast that he could easily pluck into his service with a few words to stroke his ego. As the Great Crusade progressed, numerous Iron Warriors' citadels were established on liberated worlds, ensuring that secure lines of communication were maintained, and Imperial forces would be able to use these as both bastions and as relay stations for sensitive information. Small units of Iron Warriors would be garrisoned in these new fortifications, often in absurdly small numbers. One often cited example was Iron Keep Delgas, where a single tactical squad of 10 Iron Warriors was stationed, despite the world having a distinguished population of nearly 130 million people, while other primarchs such as Leman Russ, Vulcan, and Magnus the Red refused to split their forces. Perturabo obeyed his orders with increasing bitterness. The Iron Warriors were being transformed into a garrison legion with minuscule deployments scattered across the Imperium. Their undisputed success in siege warfare led them to be typecast, making them an automatic choice for any siege or garrison mission, while ignoring the basic needs of the legion's Astartes Astartes for rest and recognition. Resentment against the Emperor's relentless demands began to build not just within Perturabo, but throughout the entirety of the 4th Legion, particularly within Perturabo himself and those closest to him. The relentless attrition and ceaseless demands wore on the Iron Warriors, corroding the iron within and degrading their morale, all the while deepening an almost inherent sense of betrayal that they seemed to have. This simmering bitterness, coupled with their increasing isolation, set the stage for the Legion's eventual rebellion. More so than many of the others who would eventually turn traitor and side with Horus, the motivations and path to damnation pursued by the Iron Warriors themselves remains more nebulous than not. Only the history of the Alpha Legion, around whom little but lies circulate, is there a comparison. The once faultlessly loyal to their own detriment Iron Warriors did not merely bend, but it seems to outsiders that they suddenly and inexplicably broke, as their allegiance was shattered, unlike the iron that they so claimed to be. Many who view the matter with dispassion see, rightly or wrongly, a legion eroded by too much horror, too much attrition, and death in a service of a cause for which they went unheeded and unthanked. They see a primarch and his sons slowly succumbing to suspicion and malcontent, and a growing madness that seemed to stem from isolation and unending despair. There remains scant evidence of wholesale corruption of the body or the insidious direct influence of the ruinous powers work amongst the Legion itself before its turn, let alone any of them actually trafficking with the dark forces before the cataclysm of the Galactic Civil War, which engulfed the Imperium. Some contend that the Iron Warriors' fatal flaw was a lack of faith at a fundamental level. They did not truly believe in the cause of the Great Crusade or the Emperor that they served, nor in themselves as anything more than machines built to kill. It might even be viewed that they were ultimately undone by the very pragmatism and logic that made them such ruthless and effective soldiers, which would also have left them ill-equipped to fight an enemy such as existential doubt and mortal terror. For Perturabo, his Primarch's mantle may have become nothing but a license for slaughter. Without a higher purpose, his conquests would be empty and his victories hollow. This view holds that the sense of emptiness was what ultimately denigrated and destroyed them from within, leaving nothing but an empty vessel to be filled with uncaring and savagery, along with the horrors that they bore. As the tragic outbreak of the Horus Heresy loomed, Perturabo faced ever-increasing pressures, and as his bitterness grew into a raging inferno, some suggest that it was the War Master Horus who time and time again engineered events, much like he did with Magnus the Red and the Justice deployments, in order to exacerbate the Primarch's psychological strain. For the Iron Warriors, the Horus Heresy was a culmination of a series of reversals and tragedies that had long plagued the Legion in the latter years of the Great Crusade, deranging and twisting its legionaries. Foremost amongst them was the rebellion of Olympia, the seat of the Legion's domain in the Mataran cluster, and the founding homeworld of Perturabo. The death of the long-lived tyrant and the strap of Olympia led to a severe degradation in the planet's politics, igniting infighting and insurrection. The violence and division on Olympia were worsened by the changes wrought by the Imperium. After bringing the planet into compliance, discontent grew as generations of Olympia's youth were tithed to the 4th Legion, never to return due to Perturabo's own usage of their lives as merely pawns on a chessboard. The rebellion's shocking start struck at the heart of the Legion and its master, coming at the worst possible time. For over a whole 10 years, the Iron Warriors had been engaged in the nearly single-handed suppression of a major infiltration by the infamous xenoform known as the Herod. Such actions were costly in lives and sanity. This was no exception. In the midst of the cleansing of the Herod warrens on the world of Gun, the 4th Legion was notified that a rebellion had occurred on Olympia. It was Horus himself who broke the news to Perturabo that Olympia had risen against the Imperium, and that Demachos had died, along with that the population, fueled by years of anti-imperial propaganda, had taken up arms. By this time, Perturabo was already weary of repeatedly having to prove his worth. The thought of being a primarch of the only Space Marine Legion unable to hold his own homeworld, appalled him greatly, as Horus begged Perturabo to return to Olympia and presented him with a power hammer known as Forgebreaker, which some Imperial scholars believe acted as a conduit through which the ruinous powers could manipulate the Iron Warrior's primarch. Upon his return to Olympia, Perturabo's long repressed anger finally was unleashed, as the primarch enacted a fearsome vengeance resulting in the wholesale slaughter of countless innocents and the burning of entire cities. Perturabo and the Iron Warriors would brutally suppress this rebellion, culminating in his confronting of his sister, and the last and only person he truly seemed to care for. For his sister told him that people cannot be forced to live to an ideal. They must be led. People are messy and more complicated than your most profound calculations. You would build a perfect world, realizing at the final moments that its greatest mar were the people living within it. Now you would destroy them to save your creation. You are a memorable god, Bo, a tomb lord. You cannot achieve the impossible, so you rage like a child. And now you have unleashed horror upon us because he cannot accept compromise. Perturabo would reply by telling her that the people do not listen, they do not know what's good for them. And she in turn would state, people do not bow to you without love, without respect. Great tyrants rule with the blessing of their people, effective ones through fear, but no tyrant ever achieved anything through indifference. You have sulked your way to damnation. You refused to accept the love of the people. You were given the approbation of a god and an army to conquer the stars, and your first act was to decimate your legion. Perturabo would then reply, they had failed. And angrily she contested him. Failed to do what? Be the best? You waste your men to prove a point that needs no proof, and then grow angry when no one notices and praises your self-sacrifice. Your petulance has cost the planet whole generations of youth, bringing your legion up to strength again and again. You have been an absent king. You have not seen the empty schools, the haunted mothers, the husbandless women. And at this, Perturabo would just compare himself to the worst of his brothers, Conrad Curze, which even his sister knew that it was a pointless refute, because she would go on to tell him, comparing yourself to the worst of your brothers to excuse the enormity of your own crimes. Listen to your words. Setting things right would be to cease recruiting and hear out the grievances of the people with forgiveness in your heart. Not this massacre. You slaughtered the delegation that came to see you, brother. In that moment you lost. You lost everything. This was a good place once. Bellicose and unfair, but it had its measure of beauty and nobility. You have destroyed it all. Why, brother? And at this moment, Perturabo seems to have cemented his siding with Horus by answering, I have other brothers now, my true siblings. I am not yours. After their argument, Perturabo would then kill his sister, cementing his loyalty to the traitors, not through the orders of another, but through what seems to be the Machiavellian plans of Horus Lupercal. In the massacre at Olympia, no one was spared. The Iron Warriors adhered to the principle of surrender or no quarter given, which they had grown accustomed to granting to none. Perturabo watched as the Olympian fortifications, which he once held in such high regards, would be overwhelmed. By the time the massacre concluded, Olympia had been reduced to slavery, as 5 million civilians lay dead. As the pyres burned through the long Olympian night, the Iron Warriors slowly grasped the magnitude of their actions. One moment they were humanity's heroes, assaulting the hideous aliens known as the Herod. The next, they were committing genocide against their own people. In the aftermath of this vengeance, Perturabo, who was consumed by utter despair, was barely able to comprehend the crimes he had committed in his petulant rage. He knew that the Emperor could never forgive him for his deeds. This tragedy drove the 4th Legion further into a private world of stark violence and bitter paranoia. The Iron Warriors' brutality would then intensify as things would go on, as they suppressed the worlds they garrisoned with renewed savagery, unleashing genocidal force at the first hints of open rebellion. Be they true or be they paranoia mattered not to the Legion. Many of their commanders grew increasingly unhinged and isolated from the imperium they had once served. Before Perturabo could contemplate atoning for his terrible actions, word would arrive of Horus's virus bombing of the remaining loyalists on Isstvan III, and the Emperor's ordering of the Iron Warriors to confront the traitors and bring them to justice. As the cataclysmic events of the Horus Heresy proper drew near, the Iron Warriors would receive news of an inconceivable kind. Astartes had slain Astartes. This revelation would have been devastating under normal circumstances, but amidst the ruins of a world thick with the stench of corpses and dead, it was apocalyptic. As soon as word arrived that Leman Russ had led his Space Wolves in a ferocious attack upon Magnus the Red and the Thousand Suns on their homeworld of Prospero, a consequence of Magnus's continued violations of the Edicts of Nicaea, the galaxy would be thrown into further turmoil as it was revealed that Horus had turned traitor. Along with his sons, the Sons of Horus Legion, Angron of the World Eaters, and Mortarion of the Death Guard had also joined the ranks of the traitors. It seems that Fulgrim and the Emperor's children had also declared their allegiance with Horus and Chaos, while the renegade primarch's unsuccessful attempts to sway Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands to join in worship of the ruinous powers. In response to this, the Iron Warriors would be ordered to join 5 other loyalist legions in a task force aimed at crushing the burgeoning rebellion against imperial rule in the Isstvan system. Between their bitter rivalry with the Imperial Fists and the guilt derived from their butchery on Olympia, it was, in hindsight, no surprise that Perturabo and his legion turned traitor to the Imperium. Historical records offer scant details of the machinations Horus must have employed to properly sway the ever-bitter Perturabo to the traitor's cause. But whatever the truth, the Iron Warriors turned upon their brothers at the Dropsite Massacre on Isstvan V, sealing their damnation and allegiance to the ruinous powers. On Isstvan V, the Iron Warriors, along with the Night Lords, the Word Bearers, and the Alpha Legion, were held in reserve. Meanwhile, Ferrus Manus and the Iron Hands, alongside the Raven Guard and the Salamanders, would be the first wave of the assault against the traitorous positions on the heavily defended planet. As Horus's rebellion progressed, the Iron Warriors seized this opportunity to humiliate their great adversaries, the Imperial Fists, on the isolated world of Hydra Cordatus, recently brought under Imperial rule by the Sons of Dorn. The Iron Warriors would make planetfall following a saturation bombardment that reduced the valley containing the planet's sole formidable fortress, the Cadmean Citadel, and the surrounding agri-settlements to ash. Magma bombs and mass drivers obliterated the rivers and transformed fertile soil into dust. Remarkably, the citadel remained nigh untouched. The small garrison of Imperial Fist legionaries left behind by Rogel Dorn struggled to believe such a precise bombardment was even possible. This demonstration was a calculated move by the Iron Warriors, designed not to eliminate, but to show their superiority over the Imperial Fists. For nearly 3 solid months, the ancient technological prowess of the fortress builders, combined with the defenders' courage and the strategic geography that yet remained after the bombardment, kept the Iron Warriors at bay. Every day the Loyalist warriors endured delayed the enemy's redeployment to somewhere else, preventing them from applying their strength elsewhere against the Imperium. However, when the Iron Warriors finally breached the Citadel's ancient defenses, they unleashed a relentless assault. The Iron Warriors slaughtered the remaining Imperial Fist legionaries alongside the heroic men and women of Hydra Cordatus who stood with them, and the refugees from the devastated fields and fortresses. In total, 42 Imperial Fists and around 13,000 men, women, and children would be condemned to death within the Citadel's walls. The Lord of Iron himself led the audacious final assault, personally slaughtering over 30 Imperial Fists Astartes within minutes. The defenders of the citadel were utterly annihilated, and the surviving mortal refugees would be enslaved by the Iron Warriors before they moved on to their next objective, as a testament to the Traitor Legion's ruthlessness. In the aftermath of the Drop Site Massacre, the Iron Warriors would establish what would become known as the Empire of Iron. Across Olympia and the surrounding star systems, on dozens of worlds, warsmiths of the 4th Legion supplanted loyalist imperial planetary governors, and under the shadow of heavily fortified battlements, these new rulers imposed their authority and extracted tithes from the subjugated populace. The Iron Warriors' next significant engagement was marked by the Battle of Fall. Here, the Iron Warriors executed a strategic ambush against the beleaguered Imperial Fists, which had been stranded in the warp as they were en route to the Istvan system. Despite the Iron Warriors' aggressive assault, the Imperial Fists managed a perilous escape and succeeded in managing to return to Terra. Following their resounding victory on Hydracordatus, Perturabo received a message that would signal a new chapter in the ongoing conflict. Fulgrim, Primarch of the Emperor's Children Legion, sought to rendezvous with Perturabo to discuss a matter of significant consequence. Although the specifics of Fulgrim's visit would remain shrouded, he would assure Perturabo that it was wondrous. Perturabo, who was familiar with Fulgrim's panache for the dramatic, had noted that it had amplified greatly since the 3rd Legion's alignment with the War Master. However, he was nonetheless intrigued. While Perturabo had no truly close allies, he shared a beleaguering respect with Fulgrim's desire for perfection. Their mutual pursuit for said perfection, though differing in means, had once fostered camaraderie, if not some manner of affection between the brothers. Perturabo speculated that Fulgrim's visit might pertain to the impending campaign against Mars, with the War Master's forces needing to secure the Martian forge cities before advancing on Terra. Perturabo would then surmise that Fulgrim's objective was to seek the Iron Warriors' assistance in breaching the Mechanicum's formidable defenses. Until further instructions arrived, Perturabo was resolved to entertain Fulgrim's visit. However, as Perturabo prepared for the anticipated campaign, he received news that the Emperor's children had arrived on Hydracordatus and that over 300 drop craft had descended upon the surface, landing beyond the valley where the Iron Warriors had established their encampment. The Iron Warriors would swiftly mobilize to greet their visitors, assembling a grand display of military might. Tens of thousands of turncoat Imperial army formed a formidable vanguard, while 2 grand battalions of Iron Warriors numbering 50,000 warriors stood in solemn formation. This show of force evoked the memories of the horrific bloodshed which occurred on Istvan V, marking a moment of unparalleled martial might and grandeur. Yet as the Emperor's children descended into the valley from their drop site, Perturabo, along with his senior officers, would be struck by the disconcerting transformation that he had observed. The 3rd Legion, once renowned for its honor and discipline, now presented in a spectacle of garish excess. The Emperor's children were utterly unrecognizable, their appearances marred by grotesque alterations and perversions that starkly contrasted with their former nobility. Perturabo, though familiar with the fundamental shifts with his brother's legion, could not fathom the purpose behind the bizarre modifications. Later, in the private confines of his command bunker, Fulgrim made an enticing offer to Perturabo. He proposed a formal alliance in a campaign of monumental significance, one that promised to fulfill Perturabo's deepest aspiration, and to ensure that every ambition that they had would be realized without disappointment. This campaign, Fulgrim suggested, could potentially alter the course of the War Master's rebellion altogether. Despite his suspicions regarding Fulgrim's motives, Perturabo realized the potential of this joint venture, as Fulgrim disclosed their objective: to journey into the very warp rift that had haunted Perturabo's dreams as far back as he could remember. And being a Primarch, that's pretty far back. For as long as he could remember it, the rift was an ancient and forbidden sight, and within it there was an even older, dangerous Xenos weapon, which Fulgrim referred to as the Angel Exterminatus. This weapon, supposedly shrouded in mystery and dread, was said to be so potent that the stars themselves had conspired to imprison it. This potential weapon, along with the gift that Fulgrim had brought his brother, convinced him to join. Unbeknownst to the Emperor's children and the Iron Warriors, their expedition had been shadowed by a determined group of lawless Astartes who had survived the Dropsite massacre on Isstvan V, whose mission they had made to impede the traitors in every which way they could. Their vessel was the Iron Hands strike cruiser known as the Sisyphum. The Sisyphum was primarily manned by Iron Hands Astartes and their mortal serfs, but it also carried a cadre of surviving salamanders and a lone Raven Guard. After they narrowly escaped the Isstvan system, the ship had endured a rather harrowing journey, fraught with perilous evasions of the traitors' blockades. Their escape had required a desperate dash to an area known as the Mandeville Point, where they narrowly avoided being ensnared by the gravitational pull of a star. In the months that followed, the Sisyphum would continue to conduct a relentless series of hit-and-run operations on the traitor forces along the northern reaches of the galaxy. Acting like a solitary predator in the expanse, it struck traitor scouts, cartograph vessels, and supply hulks, creating chaos and disrupting enemy operations. Their vessel's strategy was not to engage in direct confrontation, but to harass and destabilize the traitors' logistics. Through relentless skirmishes, the Sisyphum would make contact with other scattered loyalist forces who had escaped the massacre. This alliance led to the formation of a coordinated strategy. The fragmented 10th Legion, unable to participate in traditional battlefield engagements, would become a thorn in the side of their enemies, distracting and diverting the traitors' forces from their primary objectives. A pivotal moment occurred at Carvor Sarta, where the Iron Hands, Sabak Wayland, and the Raven Guard, Nikona Sarokin, captured a cipher host, a hybrid abomination of dark mechanicum known as a Cryptus. This capture was crucial as it allowed loyalists to break the traitors' encrypted codes and granted them access to previously inaccessible communications. Armed with this intelligence, the Sisyphum charted a course for Hydra Cordatus, guided by the decrypted communications between the two traitor primarchs, and later they would discover Fulgrim's intentions to venture into the Eye of Terror in order to recover the weapon known as the Angel's Exterminatus. With this information, the Sisyphum prepared to intercept and thwart the traitorous Vile scheme. Their journey was further aided by a mysterious Eldar figure who decided to become their guide, further increasing their chances of preventing the traitors from gaining access to this dreaded Xenos weapon. Eventually, the combined forces of the Iron Warriors and the Emperor's children would set course for the lost Eldari world of Lydris. Lydris was one of the fabled Crone worlds, and in essence the world itself was a relic of the ancient Eldari Empire. Nestled within the heart of the Eye of Terror, this planet seemed to defy annihilation, maintaining a perilous stability amidst the cataclysmic gravitational force of a supermassive black hole which threatened to consume it. The black hole, situated at the center of the eternal warp storm, was a maelstrom of incomprehensible gravity that devoured all light, matter, and space, along with time, within its voracious core. From this locus of chaos, the galaxy spewed forth unnatural matter into the void, as a garish nightmare became a gateway to the unfathomable destination of the imperium. The ultimate objective of the Primarchs lay within the grasp of the Sepulchre of Isha's Doom, located at the heart of the citadel of Amon Nyashak Kailis. The citadel seemed to be guarded by the entrance of It seemed the citadel was formed as a way to guard the entrance to the prism tomb of the Angel's Exterminatus. Prior to commencing a full-scale planetary assault, the Iron Warriors commenced a planetary orbital bombardment, which was a standard preparatory practice for any engagement on a potentially hostile environment. The bombardment itself scorched swaths across Lydris, incinerating and pulverizing structures that had withstood millennia untouched. A ring of charred and devastated earth now encircled the citadel, isolating its walls and towers, along with its temple, amidst a rolling firestorm of destructive force. However, the citadel would remain a solitary bastion amidst the planet's shattered remnants. Following the mass orbital bombardment, a multitude of Thunderhawks, Stormbirds, Warhawks, and heavy planetary landers surged from the fleet's embarkation decks as bulk tenders descended into low orbit, deploying thousands of troop carriers, armor lifters, and supply barges. Massive, gravity-cushioned mass landers were moved with deliberate grandeur as two titans of Legio Mortis would take the field. This would merely be the vanguard for the invasion, as 8 subsequent waves were planned to ensure the combined might of 2 entire Space Marine legions and their Imperial Army auxiliaries would achieve complete planetary control as soon as humanly possible. Amidst the grim tableau of war, Fulgrim observed from a distance as his Emperor's children, alongside Perturabo's Iron Warriors, engaged a relentless army of Eldari revenants within the Sepulchre of Isha's Doom, at the heart of the citadel. The assault commenced after 5 solar hours. However, the initial breach into the citadel appeared to be unguarded and unobstructed. Suspicious of the seemingly absent defenders, Perturabo ordered his men to fortify their positions as they established a meticulously arranged system of barricades, a defensive formation that was designed to safeguard the traitor legion's lines of retreat. Fulgrim's forces, on the other hand, much to Perturabo's confoundment, fragmented into multiple warbands. These groups of varied sizes would be anything between 100 warriors to nearly 1,000, would each be led by one of the captains, whose ranks would be obscured by the elaborate and ornate embellishments that now seemed to paint all the Emperor's children's armor. Leaving the fortified bridgeheads, Perturabo led his Iron Warriors and the Emperor's children into the heart of the citadel, as the Sepulchre of Isha's Doom was a grandiose palace adorned with bulbous morn towers and sweeping ivory-domed roofs. As the traitor columns advanced towards their goal, they were unwittingly observed by loyalist Astartes aboard the Sisyphum. Despite their overwhelming disadvantage, the small contingent of loyalist legionaries managed to devise an alternative route into the massive sepulchre. As Fulgrim and Perturabo approached their ultimate objective, Fulgrim's impatience became apparent as he urged Perturabo to hasten their progress. But Perturabo, ever the strategist, took a moment to scrutinize his brother and his assembled host. Fulgrim, through beaded sweat, was not merely perspiring. He seemed to be emanating a faint otherworldly light, which Perturabo's enhanced vision, which surpassed even that of other Astartes and some primarchs, revealed this unnatural radiance. As he did this, he pondered whether Fulgrim was aware of how he was now unsettlingly glowing, and this glow seemed to drain the vitality from him and his captains, leaving them weary and strained. The ghostly illumination, an anomaly in living beings, cast an ominous shadow over him, hinting at a deeper unspoken force at play. Perturabo now harbored a deep mistrust of Fulgrim, fully anticipating a betrayal from his brother. Despite this, the Lord of Iron pressed on, resolute in completing their perilous quest. As they neared their objective, the core of the structure of the Sepulchre of Isha's Doom, the latent power within Lydris stirred in malevolent recognition of Slaaneish's followers, known to the Eldar as She Who Thirsts. This led the dormant forces to awaken the guards of the sepulchre from their ancient slumber. Thousands of crystalline statues, previously inert, began to move with jarring stiffness, akin to beings roused from eons long sleep. The gems embedded in their bulbous heads glowed with vibrant colors, lending them a newfound vitality to these previously fragile forms. This army of wraiths represented the ancient Eldari dead of Lydris. Both traitor forces within the citadel and without were soon besieged on all sides by a newly awoken much larger army of restless revenants. The Eldari constructs would now emerge in vastly overwhelming numbers, their movements a grotesque blend of mechanical precision and disturbing organic fluidity. Amidst this chaos, Fulgrim vanished from Perturabo's sight. Realizing his brother's disappearance, Perturabo followed the green glow emanating from the center of the vast chamber. He understood that this was not a mere elemental energy or some form of mechanical power, but the distilled essence of those who had perished in the chamber. Perturabo descended an insurmountable spiral towards the point of light that stubbornly resisted brightening, no matter how far he traveled. The descent seemed endless until it culminated in a scene of cosmic grandeur as Fulgrim stood at the edge of a slender bridge that arched into the center of a spherical chamber. Perturabo, unimpressed by Fulgrim's grand delusions of himself becoming the angel's Exterminatus, advanced on his brother, forge-breaker in hand, intent on ending Fulgrim's treachery. But Fulgrim uttered a single word as a nightmarish resonance assaulted Perturabo's mind, forcing him to bend the knee. Fulgrim then revealed the source of Perturabo's now weakened state, which was the gift he had presented him. A cloak of the softest aramite, adorned with foxbat fur and embroidered with a pattern of spirals in the golden ratio. The cloak had been fastened with a chromed steel skull, which had embedded in it a large gemstone that was initially black with golden veins. And unbeknownst to Perturabo, as they had journeyed into the Eye of Terror, the gemstone, known as a harvester, had changed to solid gold and now pulsated with an internal rhythm. This artifact had been apparently siphoning Perturabo's strength and life force. With his brother's sacrifice, Fulgrim intended to achieve Apotheosis. As the two primarchs ascended within the shaft of light, they would emerge into the tumultuous chaos that now engulfed the heart of the sepulchre. In the dramatic culmination of their fateful encounter, Fulgrim cast Perturabo to the side. As the Lord of Iron tumbled in the languid air, he crashed down with a resounding clang of metal and crystal at the very edge of the shaft of light. A trail of blood marked Perturabo's descent, streaming a vivid red from a gash his brother had lain in his chest. As he now lay motionless, shattered and essentially lifeless, the gravity of the moment seized the attention of every Astartes present, as they recognized the monumentous event unfolding before them. The Primarch of the Emperor's children had now undergone a profound transformation. Floating above the shaft, Fulgrim was no longer the same being who had descended into the planet. The shaft no longer expelled its green torrent of light into the darkness above. Instead, it emitted a faint, waning glow as Fulgrim's armor pulsed with a vibrant energy, as it contained the light of what appeared to be 1,000 straining suns, striving to break free. His eyes were now dark and doll-like, and to all who looked upon him, they appeared to be twin dark abysses, portals to a realm of experience and sensation beyond the reach of ordinary minds, accessible only to those driven to the extremes of desire. As Fulgrim neared the zenith of his apotheosis, Perturabo, having regained some measure of strength, rose to his feet. Clutching the Maugre stone, the harvester, in his hands, he would advance towards his brother, holding aloft the stone just over the shaft. Perturabo then locked eyes with Fulgrim, searching for any trace of remorse, a sign that his brother might have regretted the treachery that had led them to this point. Yet he found nothing. The Fulgrim he had once known had been irretrievably lost, replaced by the figure that now seemed consumed by the hunger for godhood. At this sight, Perturabo's heart ached with the realization that Fulgrim had transcended the realm of angels to pursue divinity. Disillusioned with his brother, Perturabo declared that mankind had long surpassed the need for such beings, and with a final gesture of disdain, he hurled the harvester into the depths of the shaft, casting aside the last vestige of their shared past. In the midst of this climactic confrontation, a sudden eruption of bolter fire shattered the tense standoff, as the Emperor's children were violently cast from their feet as a black armored figure charged into the fray. The new arrivals, marked by a distinct mauled fist emblazoned on their shoulder guards, were none other than the Iron Hands. The chamber now erupted into a chaos. as traitor and loyalist clashed. As the battle raged on, the noose tightened around the two primarchs. At the heart of the conflict, Perturabo, once again weakened and on his knees, faced Fulgrim, who hovered eerily mid-air. The struggle between the Iron Hands and the Emperor's children, along with the Iron Warriors, would intensify around them. Amidst this chaos, the Medrengard, known as Sharokin, managed to seize the fallen Magerstone. Understanding the significance of the relic, Sharokin concluded that its destruction was paramount, and with determination he took a bolter from a slain Emperor's Children warrior, aimed carefully at the strange stone, and fired. The impact of the stone's destruction was immediate, as Perturabo, who had been weakened by the stone's draining effects, felt a surge of renewed strength as the Chaos Relic's influence departed. Fulgrim's body reacted with a resonant intensity, as the Magerstone had not only siphoned Perturabo's vitality, but had also merged their essences into a singular potent force. This amalgamation of power was pivotal to Fulgrim's brutal ascension. At this moment, Fulgrim's armor disintegrated from his body, flaking away like gold in a dust storm, leaving him exposed. His flesh burned with a furnace-like heat, surrounded by spectral flames of shimmering pink and purple. These flames danced around him, ravenous, as if it were a fire who was attempting to consume him. Perturabo now regained his full strength and rose, hefting his mighty warhammer onto his shoulder. Fulgrim perceived his impending demise in Perturabo's eyes at that very moment, and grinned with a chilling sense of inevitability. With a grim determination, Perturabo swung Forgebreaker in an arc, as the hammer cleaved clean through the air and split Fulgrim's body wide. In that decisive moment, the culmination of their brutal conflict had been achieved. The impact of Perturabo's warhammer was cataclysmic, as Fulgrim's body would not only disintegrate, but in essence it would explode with a raw force, a release that seemed to echo a primordial scream of creation. At this moment, the chamber, which was once filled with the cacophonous din of the ongoing battle, was now awash in a blinding radiance, too intense for even the most stalwart of eyes to look away. This eruption resembled the light of a newborn sun, its fiery brilliance heralding both destruction and rebirth. In this overwhelming illumination, every eye was drawn to the spectacle, as the intensity threatened to blind or drive the observers mad. Through squinted eyes and shimmering reflections, the survivors of this initial clash beheld a vision of both magnificence and a terrifying nightmare, a fusion of agonizing death and violent rebirth. Amidst the shining light, a figure materialized, gradually becoming discernible, and to Perturabo's horror and disbelief, he recognized this figure. It was Fulgrim, now stripped of the grotesque adornments that had once marred his form. The Primarch stood pristine, as immaculate as the day he had been created by the Emperor. Yet this perfection was short-lived, as Fulgrim's body would now undergo a grotesque transformation. His back arched violently, as his bones cracking like gunshots. All the while, his flesh shifted fluidly under his skin, reshaping under some unseen force. His legs would elongate and merge into a singular serpentine tail, covered in thick reptilian scales and chitinous armor. This metamorphosis was both mesmerizing and horrifying, and a sharp contrast to the being that Fulgrim had once been. Perturabo, observing this transformation, was filled with despair. He had destroyed Fulgrim's mortal shell, only to witness the emergence of an immaterial entity, a being of light and energy and will. Fulgrim's face at that moment contorted into a mask of ecstasy and agony, remaining hauntingly pristine, and would now be crowned by two obsidian horns, which curved over his skull, perverting its former perfection. Fulgrim had transcended his mortal limitations and become a demon prince, an exalted champion of Slaanesh, the first traitor Primarch to achieve such a demonic apotheosis, and his departure was marked by a cryptic message that he would one day reunite with Perturabo and renew their fraternal bond. With a dramatic flourish, Fulgrim raised his arms, and a shimmering curtain of light enveloped him and his retinue of Emperor's children, Space Marines, in a final flare of arcane energy as they vanished from the chamber, leaving Perturabo alone amidst the fading echoes of their once shared destiny. As the Emperor's children now vanished, the Crone world began to unravel. The force that had sustained and protected the planet, a nexus of Eldari life force, was no longer present. Without its stabilizing power, Lydris was left vulnerable to the colossal gravitational pull of the supermassive black hole at the heart of the Eye of Terror. Across the widening chasms of the world, the Iron Hands collected their wounded and retreated from the planet's surface as it was torn apart by ever-growing fissures. As they left, their eyes, filled with loathing, remained fixated on the stunned Perturabo. But rather than vainly attempting to end him, the harsh reality set in. They could not confront the Lord of Iron and hope to survive. They could not even hope to hold him off long enough for the planet to kill him along with them. The Iron Hands would now make their way off-world, leaving Perturabo to his fate, be it survival or death. Perturabo, unmoved by their departure, led his own warriors out of the collapsing citadel. Once aboard his flagship, the Iron Blood, he observed the final catastrophic events of the now dead Eldari Crone world. The planet's disintegration was a spectacle of cosmic forces, with Lydris falling victim to the gravitational power of the endless abyss. The Iron Blood strained to break free from the planet's orbit, but the black hole's grip on reality was growing more insistent by the second. Many of the smaller Iron Warrior ships had already succumbed to the black hole's perilous pull and disappeared into its depths. Only the larger capital ships with their powerful engines managed to stave off the void's pull, though they could only seemingly delay the inevitable. Surrounded by his triarchs, Perturabo stood resolute, as he declared with unwavering resolve to advance and never to retreat. Despite this apparent self-destructive mission, he was determined to heed Fulgrim's promise that the brothers would one day reunite. With this in mind, Perturabo uttered a command that his fleet would enter the black hole. As they plunged into the heart of terror, a grim determination was set by Perturabo. Their path would be fraught with peril, but there was only one way forward. With their fate sealed, the Iron Warriors embarked into their descent into the unknown, their destiny entwined with the formidable and foreboding forces within the Eye itself. Fulgrim's prophecy would eventually prove accurate, as Perturabo and his Iron Warriors would emerge unscathed from the Eye of Terror, emerging from the singularity within the Eye all the way across the galaxy into the Talran system. Upon his arrival, Perturabo learned of the chaos artifact known as the Curses of Algar, which was concealed beneath the surface of Talran. Recognizing the potential power for the traitor legions, he swiftly formulated plans to seize it. What initially was intended as a strategic raid rapidly evolved into a protracted, grueling conflict known as the Battle of Talran, where both the traitors and the Imperium forces funneled war material and reinforcements to their respective allies. On this verdant world, each side was determined to claim victory. The Iron Warriors responded to the stalemate with devastating virus bomb attacks, transforming the once rich, forested world of Talran into one of the harshest deserts. The climactic change set the stage for what would become known as one of the largest tank battles in Imperial history, with over 1 million armored vehicles clashing at any one time across the newly formed desert. Despite their efforts, the Iron Warriors would be forced to ultimately retreat without securing the relic. Following the withdrawal from Talran, the Iron Warriors were assigned to defend worlds situated behind Horus's front lines. These worlds were crucial for the traitors' supply chain and had become increasingly vulnerable due to the weakening of the Ruinstorm after the Second Battle of Davin. The Iron Warriors, alongside other traitor forces, fought fiercely for control of Yarant and the Forge world of Vanheim during this tumultuous period. As the Heresy progressed into the final stages, the Iron Warriors found themselves overextended and inadequately supplied, engaging in relentless and thankless sieges once again, but this time against the ever-advancing Ultramarines led by Reboot Guilliman and in these conflicts they suffered severe losses, as the Iron Warriors' roles would now become eerily reminiscent, fighting piecemeal engagements across the galaxy. The irony that they had been assigned this role once again by Horus would not be lost on Perturabo, as it would be eventually part of what led to his plans to turn traitor once again and usurp Horus, who he hoped would be wounded enough for him to take after the siege of Terra. This arduous phase came to a halt when Perturabo received orders to rendezvous with his brother Primarch Angron of the World Eaters on Ulnor. In preparation for the siege of Terra, despite the necessity of abandoning the sacrifices made by his legion on various worlds and ensuring a significant loss of forces during the retreat, the redeployments were deemed necessary by the War Master, and Perturabo would obey. After 7 years of civil war following the Dropsite Massacre, Perturabo, accompanied by a substantial contingent of the Iron Warriors, finally arrived at Ulnor, as he joined Angron of the World Eaters in their march towards Terra, eventually having to force the Demon Primarch into a nigh endless maze in order to transport him so Angron may play his pivotal role during the siege of Terra, in particular during the siege of the Imperial Palace. This battle allowed Perturabo to feel an immense perverse satisfaction, in particular in dismantling the Imperium's mighty fortifications as an insult to Dorn. After the failure of the War Master, the ultimate fate of Perturabo's Iron Warriors would remain generally unclear, for the devastating clash of their siege warfare against the Imperium was cut short by Horus's death at the hands of the Emperor aboard his battleship in orbit over Terra. In the wake of this pivotal moment, the Iron Warriors and the remaining traitor legions almost en masse retreated into the Eye of Terror. However, their escape was not without consequence, as the Iron Warriors would be engaged in a protracted rearguard action during the Great Scouring, as Perturabo strove to retain their foothold in the surrounding systems of Olympia. It was during this turbulent period that Perturabo sought to assert the might of his legion and finally test their mettle against his long-standing rivals of the Imperial Fists and his brother Rogel Dorn. Perturabo would conceive and execute a masterstroke in strategic warfare, a trap on the world of Sebastus IV, designed to ensnare Rogel Dorn along with his legion in a confrontation that they both anticipated and dreaded. This elaborate trap was dubbed the Eternal Fortress, which spanned 20 square Terran miles and was in essence a labyrinth of bunkers, towers, minefields, trenches, tank traps, and redouts. Upon learning of this formidable fortress, Dorn would make a bold declaration. He would dig Perturabo out of his hole and bring him back to Terra in an iron cage. Dorn would anticipate a battle marked by honor and chivalry, but Perturabo had other plans. The Iron Warriors began isolating the 4 Imperial Fist companies, which made planetfall, quickly cutting them off from their orbital support. This strategy was one of divide and conquer, which left the Imperial Fists struggling in isolation. Their once formidable coordination was now disrupted by Perturabo's meticulous tactics. And as the battle persisted, some of the Imperial Fists would manage to breach the outer defenses and reach what they believed was the central keep of the Eternal Fortress. But much to their dismay, they found no such structure, only an open space, a structure, and they found themselves now surrounded by additional defensive positions. The fortress itself was a ruse, a decoy of no strategic significance. By the 6th day of the siege, the remaining Imperial Fists that fought had to do so individually, using the bodies of their fallen comrades for cover as they struggled against overwhelming odds. The siege would later become known as the Iron Cage would continue for an additional 3 weeks. The beleaguered Imperial Fists would finally receive some form of relief from Raboot Guilliman and the Ultramarines. However, the cost of the siege was devastating, and Dorn would emerge from the conflict a broken man. The Imperial Fist chapter would in essence be rendered incapable of combat for 19 standard years, as they would labor to recover from their grievous losses, and the battlefield of Sebastus IV became a testament to Perturabo's ruthless efficiency, winning out over Dorn's blockheaded stubbornness. The victory of Sebastus IV would culminate in a sacrifice of over 400 loyalist space marines, and would also mark Perturabo's ascendancy to the rank of Demon Prince of Chaos Undivided, as this notorious campaign had secured Perturabo's dark apotheosis, along with cementing his reputation as one of the most formidable and feared figures in the history of the Traitor Legions. Following the victory at the Iron Cage, the majority of the Iron Warriors, now under the command of Perturabo as a Demon Prince, would retreat to the Eye of Terror, and those that remained would establish a new stronghold on the demon world of Medrengard. Eventually, the Great Scouring would mark the relentless pursuit by the Loyalist forces in order to dismantle any traitor strongholds left in the Imperium. The remaining Imperial Fists, alongside the Ultramarines, spearheaded a campaign to liberate previously subjugated worlds from the traitors, those who still remained. In a dramatic twist of fate, the Imperial Fists found themselves laying siege to the Iron Warriors' bastions once again on their last stronghold of Olympia. This siege was a rather protracted affair, and despite the Imperial Fists' relentless efforts, the traitors refused to yield easily. The conflict would drag on for around a decade, and would be characterized by intense fighting and heavy casualties. Ultimately, the Iron Warriors resorted to extreme measures in order to deny their enemies victory. In a final desperate act of defiance, they detonated their nucleonic stockpiles, transforming Olympia into a desolate, radioactive wasteland. The once thriving homeworld of the Iron Warriors was once again left in ruins by the Iron Warriors' actions, and subsequently quarantined by the Imperium, as it was designated Bendita by the Inquisition, and for over 10,000 years, no further mentions of Olympia have surfaced in Imperial records, as this world will remain as a grim testament to the devastation wrought by the final catastrophic efforts of the Iron Warriors, as rather than preserve their legacy, they would rather embrace annihilation. And while during the next few thousand years, the Iron Warriors did have interactions with the greater galaxy, the next major military role that they would play, which irrefutably changed the galaxy, would be the 13th Black Crusade, which unfolded in year 999 M41, where the Iron Warriors, under the command of warsmith Barban Falk, launched a decisive assault on the Mechanicus Forge world of Hydracordatus, instigating the second siege of Hydracordatus. This forge world was crucial to the Imperium of Man, as it not only provided weapons of war and war material, but also secretly housed the valuable tithes of gene seed. The Iron Warriors, driven by the need to replenish their ranks, sought this gene seed stored within the stasis vaults on Hydracordatus. These vaults contained the genetic material from their most formidable adversaries, the Imperial Fists, whose pure gene seed was now essential for the Iron Warriors' reconstruction and resurrection as a true threat to the galaxy without the aid of exterior forces. The corrupting influence of the warp had, in essence, over the millennia rendered their own gene seed increasingly unstable, making it nearly impossible to create new Space Marines without the sought-after pure gene seed stock. Warsmith Falk for this endeavor would be accompanied by his chief rivals of Forix and Kroger of the First and Second Grand Companies, respectively, along with Honsou, a prominent champion amongst the Iron Warriors. Their target was the formidable Citadel and the Manufactorum in particular, which was known as Tor Christo. This stronghold, guarded by a substantial garrison of Astra Militarum troops and a small detachment of Titans from Legio Ignitum, were the keystone in the Imperium's defenses of the Imperial Fist's genetic legacy. The Iron Warriors faced not only the formidable defenses of Tor Christo, but also reinforcements from an entire company of Imperial Fists, determined to protect their genetic heritage. Despite the ferocious resistance, at the end of the day, the Iron Warriors triumphed, and they breached the Citadel's defenses and overpowered both the Imperial garrison and the reinforcing Imperial Fists. This victory was a significant boon for the Chaos Gods, who granted Warsmith Folk the coveted ascension to Demon Princehood. Before his transformation, Folk appointed Honsou as his successor, entrusting him with the command of his Grand Company and the crucial mission of restoring the Iron Warriors to proper numbers with the Imperial Fist's gene seed once it was returned to Medrengard, the Iron Warriors' demon world within the Eye of Terror. Upon securing their prize, the Iron Warriors would withdraw from Hydrocordatus, and in a final act of vengeance, which would erase all traces of their invasion, they bombarded the remains of the citadel into dust. The only survivor left behind was a singular Imperial witness who would become the sole bearer of the grim tale of the Iron Warriors' devastating victory. Upon his return to the Iron Warriors' demon world within the Eye of Terror, warsmith Honsou dutifully transferred the bulk of the coveted gene seed to Warmaster Abaddon, the Despoiler. However, Honsou successfully retained a significant portion of this valuable genetic material for his own purposes. With the ill-gotten gains, he embarked on a clandestine project, the creation of a novel genetic system known as the Demonculaba. The Demonculaba's process would combine advanced technology with dark sorcery in order to produce new Astartes for the Iron Warriors in record time. This gruesome procedure involved sealing an adolescent human boy within of a genetically modified human female, which would be termed a Demonculaba, which would either result in a horribly mutated abomination, which would be then known as the Unfleshed, who were cast out into the desolate wastelands of the demon world, or new chaos-corrupted Astartes, who were loyal to the Iron Warriors and ready to join their ranks. These Demonculaba hosts would be kept within Honsou's fortress, Kalan Gol, in defiance of his predecessor's promise to distribute the gene seed amongst his fellow Iron Warriors commanders. Honsou plunged his forces into a brutal civil war against his two rival warsmiths, Lord Toramino, along with the Chaos Dreadnought, Berossus. During this intricate conflict, Captain Uriel Ventress and his comrade, veteran Sergeant Bassianus Lysis, both of the Ultramarines, embarked on a perilous mission. Recently exiled from their chapter for breaching the Codex Astartes, these warriors were recently tasked with a death oath sworn by chapter master Marnius Calgar. Ventress and Lysan would travel aboard the ancient demon engine of Famulus Demonus into the Eye of Terror and infiltrate the Iron Warriors' demon world in order to seek out and destroy these Demonculaba, which could potentially allow the traitors to create Space Marines at a rate that could not be contended with. Upon his arrival at Kalan Gol, Captain Uriel Ventress would be entombed within the womb of a Demonculaba. A harrowing fate would then occur to Ventress's comrade, Lysan, as warsmith Honsou was intrigued by the bionic arm made out of living metal that had replaced Lionsin's, which he had decided to appropriate for himself. The arm, which was composed of necrodermis, the living metal intrinsic to the Necrons and their Catan shards, was removed and then attached onto Honsou, sparking Lysan's fury against the savage morticians responsible for the procedure. Despite this, Uriel managed a miraculous escape, slipping free from the chaos-corrupted womb and making his way to safety via the sewage chute. The conflict within Kalan Gul intensified. The forces of Broseros, the Iron Warriors' chaos leader, launched an assault on Honsou's citadel. A colossal duel between the two rival warsmiths ensued, and despite the ferocity of battle, Honsou, with the aid of his demonically possessed bodyguard, ultimately triumphed. The death of the Dreadnought warsmith led to a significant shift in alliance, as his surviving forces, cowardly as they were, decided to join with Honsou, as they would now struggle against warsmith Tormanio. Uriel Ventress, undeterred by the previous setbacks, returned to Kalan Gul with a cadre of unfleshed mutants. His mission was simple: to destroy the Demonculaba and liberate the Heart of Blood, a powerful demonic avatar of Khorne, as the Heart of Blood had been imprisoned by the Iron Warriors and forced to maintain an unbreakable psychic barrier around Kalan Gul for over 10 millennia. Once freed, the Heart of Blood's release would shatter the psychic barriers, allowing Tormino to launch a psychic assault against Honsou's citadel, and turning the Hour of Corn's forces against the Iron Warriors as a whole. In the ensuing chaos, Honsou and his retinue cornered Uriel and the now retrieved Lysagne, intending to execute them. However, the Unfleshed, now a rather angry force of their own, who had allied with the Ultramarines, intervened, attacking the Iron Warriors and dismembering them. In the midst of this upheaval, Captain Ventress caught up to Honsou and delivered a fatal blow to the head with his bolter. Having fulfilled his death oath, Uriel and Lysagne returned to their chapter on Macragge. Yet against all odds, it seemed Honsou would somehow survive his fatal wound, as the battered warsmith would now find the exhausted Heart of Blood amidst the ruins of Calan Gaol, collapsed upon the citadel floor. Utilizing the formidable power of the Heart of Blood, Honsou unleashed unprecedented devastation upon his last remaining rival's forces. The ensuing slaughter was cataclysmic to say the least, with the ancient fury of the Heart of Blood laying waste to everything within its path. The skies above the Iron Warriors' demon world was now scorched by its black sun, and the skies were filled with souls released into oblivion, marking the Citadel's final ruinous descent into utter chaos. Despite emerging victorious from this brutal conflict between the Iron Warriors, warsmiths, Honsou's triumph rang hollow. The intricate war had left his forces and the Iron Warriors as a whole decimated, with many of his soldiers and all of the Damanculaba reduced to rubble. Undeterred, Honsou began the formidable task of rebuilding his army, drawing upon the ranks of the surviving Chaos Renegades. Amongst these were the notorious Chaos Space Marines Aradik Vanas and Cardanas Gendral, as well as a vile abomination known as the Newborn, a genetic clone of Captain Uriel Ventress created by the Damanculaba just prior to its destruction. The destruction of Calan Gaol and the defeat inflicted upon him by Uriel Ventress ignited a fierce rage and hatred within Honsou, as his quest for vengeance against the Ultramarines and their captain would become the driving obsession which would keep him alive for many years. Honsou sought to extract a grievous retribution which would lead him to target Defense Platform Ultra 9, a key Imperial space station orbiting above Terrace Ultra, the site of Ventress's celebrated victory over the Tyranids. Honsou's warband would then seize control of the station and, in a display of ruthlessness, slaughtered all aboard, as they commandeered the station's formidable missile array system to launch a devastating assault. A volley of 16 orbital torpedoes surged from the platform's launch base, followed by additional salvos, leading to a total of 3 being fired, depleting the entire payload of missiles upon the station. Each missile was directed towards the planet's surface, where upon reaching a predetermined altitude, they would unleash their deadly cargo, the Hereticus viral strain, an experimental pathogen which would be dispersed into Tarsus Ultra's atmosphere. This virulent rain caused catastrophic damage as insidious microbes began to ravage the planet's indigenous and xenos vegetation. Tarsus Ultra, which had already been scarred by the xenos known as the Tyranids, now faced further devastation. The alien flora left behind by the Tyranids had already tainted the planet's ecology and left it barely standing. Towering spears of grotesque alien vegetation had choked the natural landscape, and its invasive flora was spreading uncontrollably. This invasive plant life consumed the nutrients from their soil and generated hyper-fertile spores, which would further the Tyranids' deadly plans, even if there were no Tyranids left on the planet proper. And this horrible viral alien contamination would be made worse by the experimental virus released by Honsou. The Hereticus virus, a biological agent conceived from the fragmented researches of Magos Hereticus of the Adeptus Mechanicus, was originally designed to revolutionize agriculture on agri-worlds by exponentially increasing the crop yield. However, in the context of Honsou's wrath, this agent became an unprecedented tool of devastation. Upon its release into the atmosphere, this strain catalyzed and immediately led to an uncontrollable response from the plant life and the existing flora. Alien growths surged uncontrollably across the planet, expanding by kilometers within seconds. The rapid proliferation of mutant plant life drained the nutrients from the soil and emitted excessive heat, causing the planet's ambient temperature to quickly soar. As this viral strain accelerated the growth of the monstrous plants, spore chimneys would emerge, voraciously consuming the oxygen on the planet and progressively stripping away the planet's atmospheric layers. Unlike the swift obliteration of an Exterminatus, this was a protracted ecological annihilation on a global scale. Despite the distress signals that were broadcasted into the imperium, only the wealthy, influential, or the cunning would be able to manage to escape on makeshift starcraft. In the wake of this catastrophic assault, billions were left behind, and within weeks, the planet's atmosphere was depleted by the voracious alien flora. The resulting exposure to the hard stellar radiation would extinguish all remaining life, and the scorched, desolate remains of the surface became permanently barren. In the aftermath, an explorator team led by Magos Locard of the Adeptus Mechanicus and accompanied by Skitarii forces ventured onto the dead world to investigate, guided by a solitary beacon which was discovered on the battered orbital torpedo. Upon extracting the payload, the Magos uncovered a cracked helmet. Its deep blue color, once vibrant, now showed signs of damage. Its paint chipped, and it had one eye lens missing. The helmet they found was emblazoned with the emblem of the Ultramarines, and this would be a stark message to Uriel Ventress, sent personally to him by Honsou in order to ensure the cost of their confrontations was known. With his revenge now in part accomplished, Honsou was able to gear back into rebuilding his forces, which would lead Honsou into journeying into the Badab sector, a region infamous for the brutal Badab War. His destination was the heart of the warp rift known as the Maelstrom, specifically to New Badab, the homeworld of Huron Blackheart, the notorious tyrant of Badab and the leader of the Red Corsairs. Here Honsou sought to participate in the Skull Harvest, a savage contest orchestrated by Blackheart himself. The Skull Harvest was a ruthless competition where Chaos warbands clashed in a bid for supremacy. The victorious would absorb the ranks and resources of the defeated, solidifying their power within the Maelstrom. This would be held in the Arena of Thorns, a blood-soaked venue which would bear witness to grisly displays of decapitated heads mounted on spikes, macabre torn-up corpses arranged all around, painted with the deepest crimson blood of Space Marines and mortals alike. A truly macabre testament to the carnage that would unfold within its confines, which was a contest that promised glory and power to the victor, but demanded relentless bloodshed and the elimination of the weak. Honsou, now driven by a singular vision of vengeance, was determined to emerge as a sole champion. And over the course of this contest, his forces would expand dramatically, swelling to approximately 5,000 soldiers, a formidable army which included an array of armored units, war machines, and a diverse collection of Xenos and Corsair troops. With the allegiance of 17 warbands now under his command, Honsou's growing power was undeniable. Yet the Skull Harvest had not reached its conclusion, and the tyrant's decree was clear. Only one champion would stand victorious at the end. As the fourth day of this contest drew close, only 3 champions remained. Honsou's Iron Warriors, Bashdog Uvent, the bloodthirsty champion of the blood god Khorne, who commanded a formidable force of 6,000 warriors, and Notha Estasi, the champion of the pleasure god Slaanesh, leading a warband of 5,000. As the final confrontation loomed, then would come the final day of the Skull Harvest, and the 3 champions would enter the arena, wielding whatever weapon they would choose, as they prepared for the ultimate confrontation. This stage of the battle was a test of endurance and tactical acumen, where each warrior sought to deceive, and exploit any signs of weakness or hesitation in their opponents. Honsou, however, was undeterred by the spectacle, and his focus was singular. The contest was simply a means to an end, one that drove him revenge and dominance. In the climactic showdown, warsmith Honsou was quickly able to eliminate the Slaneshi champion, leaving him to face the berserk Khornate champion. The ensuing battle was brutal, and in a display of savagery, Honsou managed to shatter the Khornate's warrior's weapon, leading them into a desperate blood-soaked melee. Despite the ferocity of the Khornate champion's attacks, which in multiple occasions did overwhelm Honsou, the warsmith managed to exploit the tiniest, most crucial moment, and in a decisive maneuver, Honsou used the necrodermis arm he had taken from the ultramarine to rip a jagged wound into the Khornate champion's neck, who would then slowly begin to bleed to death. And in this moment, a defector from Honsou's ranks seized his opportunity, plunging his own sword into the Khornate champion's chest, piercing his armor to the back. Seeing his opportunity, Honsou did not allow the Khornate warrior any respite, as he delivered a crushing blow with his axe, shattering the warrior's shoulder guard and cleaving the champion of the blood god from collarbone to pelvis. In order to fulfill the fallen champion's last request, Honsou decapitated him and sent his skull to the blood god. Emerging as a sole victor, Honsou now left Nubadab with an unprecedented force of nearly 17,000 Chaos Warriors, all bound to his cause by blood and the oaths they took to the tyrant of Badab. An oath that they would fear breaking as much as they would fear standing against Abaddon the Despoiler, due to the power the Blackheart held. As Honsou's starship ascended from Nubadab, it was accompanied by an array of vessels gifted to him by the tyrant of Badab, all intended for the purposes of waging war against the Imperium. In addition to this, abominable fleet of corsairs and renegades would also be gifted to Honsou. With his forces now bolstered and his fleet expanded, it appeared that the Iron Warriors under warsmith Honsou would set their course for the eastern fringe of the realms of Ultramar, prepared to extract his vengeance upon his sworn enemies. Assembling his forces with meticulous precision, warsmith Honsou prepared to enact his plan with a vengeance, targeting Captain Uriel Ventress by initiating the catastrophic invasion of Ultramar in 999 M41. At the heart of this audacious campaign was the formidable demon prince Makar the Reborn, a being of malevolent power who had once been Malag Kartoth, a dark apostle of the Word-Bearers during the Horus Heresy. Honsou capitalized on Makar's deep-seated animosity towards the Ultramarines in order to secure the assistance of Abaddon the Despoiler's seer, Morgenia. This alliance would facilitate the liberation of Makar's spirit from its imprisonment, with the warp core of the Star Fort Indomitable, a stronghold captured by Chapter Master Marnius Calgar and encased in the warp in 935 M41. With the fort under the control of Honsou, he would be able to free Makar fully, who would then possess the armored dreadnought chassis of Brother Altan of the Ultramarines, who had been previously tasked with guarding the fort. The Demon Prince utilized Altran's once sacred shell to manifest into the material universe. As Honsou's invasion commenced, he would assault the arid imperial agri-world of Tarsus. Makar, leveraging his new freedom, bound the Indomitable to a warp gate and summoned a vast army of demons, unleashing them upon the planet's cities and slaughtering its entire population. In a strategic maneuver, Honsou lured the Ultramarines into a deadly trap, the capital city of Axum, nearly obliterating Captain Uriel Ventress's entire 4th Company. Following their victory on Tartanus, Honsou's fortress turned their attention to the imperial ocean world of Talasar, as Makar swiftly assumed the position of shared commander of the Chaos Army. Leading the initial strike as the vicious Chaos champions contended for supremacy. The Demon Prince designated Honsou's forces as Bloodborne, a term that only fueled the warsmith's resentment. Under Makar's command, the Chaos forces were assigned various strategic targets. Makar's influence then directed Honsou to Calth, Ventress's homeworld, with the explicit orders to annihilate the tomb of Benatus. Benatus was a revered Ultramarines captain who had previously slain Makar when the Demon Prince was still a mortal Dark Apostle. The tomb's sanctity was imbued with power due to the Imperial faith, which rendered it a place that Makar could not approach, no matter how much he tried. Guided by a clone known as the Newborn, Honsou and his ally, Cordas Grendel, pinpointed the tomb's location within the cavernous Draconi on Calth. As they prepared to desecrate the tomb, Honsou grew suspicious over Makar's aversion to the world, which led him to conduct a further investigation, and his inquiries revealed a hidden artifact, a combat knife known as the Shard of Eberus, buried with the long-dead Ultramarines captain. This revelation suggested a deeper significance to Makar's reluctance, indicating that the artifact might hold some vital importance or power that could influence the demon's actions, potentially even binding him to servitude. As Honsou uncovered the true nature of the combat knife, the Shard of Eberus, he realized its profound significance. The seemingly unbreakable blade was imbued with centuries of unwavering Imperial faith, which led to its potential to inflict a grave and permanent wound upon Demon Prince Makar. However, before the warsmith could even leverage his newfound asset, the situation deteriorated dramatically. Captain Uriel Ventress and a command squad of Ultramarines arrived at the scene and launched a determined assault against Honsou's forces. Tasked with eliminating Ventress, the Newborn, Honsou's corrupted clone of Ventress, engaged in combat against his Ultramarine counterpart. Despite his efforts, Ventress would prevail over the Newborn in a fierce confrontation. As the battle raged, Honsou's forces found themselves besieged, not only by Ultramarines, but also by what appeared to be the spectral manifestations of Captain Venatus and other revived Ultramarines who were rising from their tombs. Overwhelmed and facing the collapse of his revenge-driven campaign, Honsou would resort to a drastic maneuver. He activated the explosives intended to obliterate the tomb, which triggered a massive explosion and buried Ventress along with his squad under tons of rubble. Despite the catastrophic blast and the subsequent cave-in, Ventress and almost the entirety of his squad survived. The aftermath of this explosion yielded no trace of Honsou's body. However, circumstantial evidence suggested that the elusive Iron Warrior might have escaped yet again, as a drilling machine employed by the Iron Warriors to access the tomb's complex had also vanished, further supporting the theory that Honsou had evaded demise by the skin of his teeth. Meanwhile, Makar, though having survived the imminent fallout, was ultimately confronted by Marneus Calgar on the planet Tarsus. The Demon Prince's fate was sealed when Marneus Calgar, wielding the Shard of Eberus, obliterated Makar's essence, erasing him from existence. This was a grim retribution for the Demon Prince's actions, who had originally been slain by the very same blade during the Horus Heresy. The final event of galactic import that the Iron Warriors would take part in would be known as the Grand Siege. Having meticulously analyzed the defenses of Segmentum Obscurus through a combination of advanced remote scrying and relentless interrogations of captured loyalists, along with the vast network of technocultist informants, Perturabo amassed a comprehensive understanding and analysis of the strengths and vulnerabilities of Segmentum Obscurus. When Cadia succumbed to the might of Warmaster Abaddon during the 13th Black Crusade, and the Cicatrix Maledictum rent the galaxy asunder, Perturabo seized his opportunity to execute a grand, multifaceted strategy, mobilizing the vast armies that were strictly loyal to him, Numbering in the thousands, Perturabo orchestrated a campaign of unprecedented scale and ferocity. His plan was to use his Iron Warriors to set in motion a massive blockade of the Imperium. Iron Warriors, augmented by fearsome demon engines and formidable artillery batteries, would embark on a series of sieges against Imperial worlds who had been previously impregnable. These worlds would now be subjected to the Iron Warriors, the true Iron Warriors, those loyal to Perturabo, and would teeter on the brink of utter devastation. Perturabo's assault has been currently marked by a sheer scale and grandeur that it has made many within the Imperium question if they're even part of a synchronized whole, or if they're just a multitude of synchronized warbands taking the best opportunity they have to win, which has forced even the most fortified bastions of the Imperium to confront their vulnerabilities. This massive siege has not only showcased that the Iron Warriors are truly brilliant in the implementation of tactics when under the command of their primarch, but it also delivered a stark reminder to the menace which are the forces of chaos.